Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Lori, and I'm joined today by Shanthi, Megan, and Dave for another episode of our DBT Skills series, where we're going through the book DBT for Life by Diana Partington. If you haven't seen it yet, it's this beautiful book here. So we're still on the mindfulness unit. So for those of you who are new to Dialectical Behavior Therapy, there's 4 units in Dialectical Behavior Therapy. The first one is mindfulness. And so far we've gone through just the mindfulness skill generally, the wise mind skill, the stop and observe skill, and today we're going to be going through describe together. So does anybody want to start with a description of describe for them?
Sure, I'm happy to. And I'm happy to summarize the story as well, because that probably helps. But I think to me, and in the way it's described in the book, the describe skill is really about, and we touched a little bit on it in the last episode, but it's about noticing where opinions and biases have worked themselves into my view of conflict or how I feel about someone, particularly not so much if you're having positive views of somebody, but more if you're having negative views of someone or a situation, looking at like what parts of your feelings about it are and your reactions to it are an opinion versus what's actually going on. So in this story, it's the story is, there are parents and kids who are in a DBT group, and they're asked to write a couple sentences about someone they're mad at. And one of the moms writes, "My husband is a jerk. He never does anything for my birthday." And, it's sort of, there's more in that vein in the story, but the general idea is that, they're sort of urged to look at the statements they write and pick apart what parts of that are facts and what parts of that are opinions. And so there's some obvious things like jerk. I mean, that's an opinion, and you can sort of dig into, well, like what sorts of, what are some of the things that he actually is doing that are behind that? And also then, using words like never, where, I think this is the one where at some point then someone's pointing out and then this person is looking and saying, well, there are some nice things that he does. So, never is not quite appropriate. And so, by the end, I think that, again, it's not that she's giving in to everything her husband wants. I don't exactly remember what the conflict she was having with him specifically was about, but it also helps to then, get back to, I think, the purpose of a lot of these skills, which is to focus on like, what do I actually want? What do I need from a partner? What is it that like I can change or accept to make my life a life worth living? And, I think as the story points out, I shouldn't say and I don't think I'm alone. It's so easy for opinions and non-factual things and blanket statements to get baked into my thinking. And it really helps to use this skill and step back and unpack those things and figure out when they're valid and when they're not a good not a good lens to look at what am I going to do? How am I going to treat someone? How am I going to interact with someone in our relationship?
Great summary, Dave. I just wanted to add to that, that I think what I love about this skill is it ties in so many other skills. So it really ties in Dear Men, which is a skill that will come up in interpersonal effectiveness and is one that I personally value a great deal and use a lot. And it also, in some ways, relates back to the wise mind skill that we've already talked about, because it's about describing a situation without that, those like value judgments. So describing the situation is kind of inherently in that rational mind. And the alternative would be the emotion mind. So it's trying to find that middle ground, but you can't find that middle ground without being able to identify what the facts are.
So this one is hard for me because, again, with the trying to be non-judgmental, like that doesn't come easily for me. And that I think is a big part of this. But for me, what has been working lately is like when I try to do this skill like on my own, it doesn't work. But what works for me is like journaling about it. Like I have this thought that this person is like terrible and like I can't believe they did this. And then, okay, what's another way to look at it? Like, and writing about it has made it more approachable. And this is like very recently I started doing this, but it's really helped.
Is there any like particular formula that you're journaling about, or just like kind of like, are you trying to like write the statement and then kind of do what they did in the book around like what are the actual facts of this? Or is it more just generally journaling about how you're feeling about the person?
I think like journaling about it and then reading it and being like, wait, this isn't all factual. And then like going back and being like, okay, maybe I'm a little too emotional about this and revising it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like why I like to write down the wise mind, right? Like draw a Venn diagram and write it down, because sometimes when you see something on paper, it's a lot easier to understand what is a fact and what is an opinion. And I did really like that they had the like write a couple of sentences about somebody that you hate. I mean, we could do that if we wanted to now, and then like look at what the actual judgments are within that. But I thought that was like a helpful exercise to be able to kind of discern what is describe and what is just like judgy.
I've done an exercise before where like, you're like doing some journaling or something like that, and then you come back to it later with highlighters of different colors and like highlight, look at each word that I wrote, and like, if it's a fact that you use pink, and if it's an opinion yellow, and if it's a judgment, you know what I mean? And so then you're looking very specifically at each thing, and then especially when it's not a fact, then trying to rewrite that part to make it factual. It's so hard to do that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Megan, how does this skill work for you, or does it?
This is probably one of the skills that I use often. I think that also has to do with my like day-to-day life and profession, is that like being a lawyer doing like litigation, I have like statements of claim that I file, and like the court will only listen to facts. Like they don't care if you think that it was petty of someone to like put their fence on your like land. It's like, no, the land is here, the fence is on the wrong side of the land. Like you can't put any judgment into that. And so I find that this is a little more of a skill that I use, where like I think my lens of putting it on this is like, if I'm having a really hard time, I'm like, pretend I'm saying this to a judge. What would a judge think? And I actually, like, in the practice section, one of the, like, separate fact from opinions actually says, what are the observable facts, the who, what, when, and where, as though you were talking to a detective that is trying to solve a crime. And I really like that. It's like pretending you're a journalist, or like trying to write like the facts and let people form their own opinion around them. So I think this is a skill that I use quite often, but I kind of forget that it's a DBT skill, because I like literally have conversations with my articling student being like, and how would you tell this to the judge? How would you describe that? Using facts, not any judgment. And so I think this is a skill that I'm a little bit better at, to be honest.
That's, yeah, super fair. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Like my work is much more like feely. So I'm not like practicing this every day. I guess part of that for me, where I get like tripped up, and maybe it's just like tripped up on the semantics of it, but sometimes like my fact and your fact are going to be different. So like, which I don't think that they're supposed to be, but that it just happens. Like I tried after my wedding to write a Dear Man letter to somebody in my family about some of their behavior. And like, I was very like intentional about stating the facts. And I like tried really hard to make sure that I was stating facts that other people observed as well, because I wanted to make sure that like my recollection wasn't incorrect, but their recollection when they received the letter was like, well, that didn't happen. Like, I don't remember that. I didn't do that. And it was like, okay, but you did. And like, I have like 5 witnesses that I'm not going to like write their names in this letter, because that's not the point. But I'm just curious, like, has anybody run into the fact that like, it kind of feels like sometimes facts also have this dialectic of like, my fact and your fact might be somehow equally true, or like, even if they're not equally true in my opinion, I can't have that opinion. I need them to be able to both be equally.
Yeah, totally. There's something that I've heard before is like people can watch a car accident happen from four different corners of the intersection and have completely different opinions on who like caused the accident, what happened, but that doesn't make it any less true. They all just have different views of it. And I think that there's a section, it's on page 74, um, where it's talking about you were being hurtful. Is that a fact or an opinion? Whereas feeling hurt is an objective, where but the fact could be you said, I wish you would just be quiet sometimes, and I felt hurt by that. That is the fact without judgment. And I think that there can be like truth to the like, you said this, but then the like resulting action from it can have different truths. Does that make sense?
It does. And I love the car accident example because it's so true. Of like you can even watch footage of the same situation 100,000 times and like people are gonna have different opinions about what happened, even if it's on camera. But the statement around, what was it that you said? I wish you would just be quiet sometimes, and I felt hurt by that. I think the hard part in like the circumstances where I've had to use this is like people saying, I didn't say that. And then what do you do?
I mean, you remind yourself that gaslighting doesn't create a.
Fair. That's a mic drop moment.
I mean, you know, there's a different thing between people standing on different corners and each saying, this is what I saw. And the things that they saw are different. Those aren't in conflict. It's like this person saw this, that maybe this person wasn't even wearing glasses, it just saw a big pink blur, you know, like, so they saw what they saw. But the reason that doesn't work with people that are gaslighting is that they're not actually stating the facts as they see them. They're engaged in trying to win an argument by pretending that, you know, or they've either convinced themselves or
Yeah.
they've decided to try to convince you that things didn't happen the way that they happened and they're embarrassed by it. So, I mean, I think that's just the facts aren't different. It sounds like you just have a relative who, you know, even if you told them, even if you didn't say you were stumbling around and you were slurring your words, and even if you said saw you stumbling around and slurring your words, my guess is that wouldn't have helped the situation, and they wouldn't have said, oh, like, yes, you know, I wasn't, but I see that you observed that. And my guess is they would say, no, you didn't.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I think like this situation was so blatantly obvious because I had checked with other people before I wrote this describe to say like, is this what you saw? So it wasn't, they tried to say like, no, that didn't happen, but I knew deep down that had happened. I guess part of what I find difficult, and like I think I'm probably not alone in this, sometimes I feel like because we've been scapegoats for so long of like, you're the people with the problem, so like your borderline is causing our family all of these problems, we might be like more used to being gaslit by the people that raised us or are around us on a regular basis. And then I start to question my own reality, like a lot. And so then I get nervous that like somehow I made up the fact, even if I saw it and other people saw it. And then I'm like, well, maybe I'm not right. Because like, and this problem in my life goes back, I think I was like, I would say like a very small child when I started feeling that like I couldn't trust my own reality. And I don't think it was like clinical. I think it was environmental, honestly.
That's a really big one for me, especially when trying to think of like the past and how things affect me. Like, I can't go back and ask my mom questions, and like, I don't talk to my dad anymore. Like, I know that it's worthless talking to my dad. Like, pointless, I should say. So I sort of gaslight myself, like, did this really happen? Did I go through this? Like, it's hard to know what's real sometimes. So I feel you on.
Thanks, Shanti. Yeah, it's a good point about if the person that you want to ask isn't here to ask anymore, then that makes it even more complicated because you don't even know what their response would be. Does that resonate for you, Megan or Dave?
Yeah, it totally does. I kind of alluded to it in an earlier episode of like being in a bad relationship, and that like rocked my world in terms of the like gaslighting of like, especially like having everything blamed on my borderline and being like, okay, I actually had to get to a point where like during arguments, I'd turn on my phone and like press record and like flip it over so that he didn't know that I was recording it. And so that I would like later the next day after I was done like splitting and couldn't remember anything or felt like I couldn't remember anything, I'd look back at it and be like, oh man, objectively, like I think if I was watching this and didn't think it was me in here, like if this was one of my friends, I would tell her to leave him immediately. Like, and then like being like, but he said that it was all my fault last night, like the argument. So like having to like rebuild that in my life has been like a lot of like therapy and like self-evaluation and like learning to trust my gut about like even like simple things. Like, am I hungry? Okay. Like that's a very literal example of trusting my gut, but like just getting to a point where it's the practice thing over and over again, right? Is like if you practice on the small things of like, okay, I described what happened yesterday while I'm journaling. I can go back and like look at it and remember what happened. Then it gets easier to, in like more tense moments, remember what happened. But I think like what Dave said earlier about like the gaslighting and like not letting that like not affect you, because I mean it's hard to not let gaslighting affect you, but recognizing that that is like almost a skill that some people have of using it as manipulation, and recognizing that it's not anything about you that somebody's gaslighting you. Like that's a reflection on them and it's not a reflection on you. And trying to like retrust your gut about what is or is not gaslighting, I think is really important.
Yeah, I've it's funny you said the recording of conversations, Megan, because like literally had to start doing that with this family member. And I've also had it where I will put the person on speakerphone and Aaron will take minutes of the conversation. And I'm just like, I remember saying this to my counselor and she was like, okay, that is not a normal or healthy relationship. You should not have to be recording every phone call that you have with this person because you're being so gaslit that you have to check, like literally check the transcripts of the facts after a conversation. And I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. Like, I wouldn't do that with like another person in my life. It's just this. There's been like 2 people in my life where I've had to do this. And that's like not normal. But like not like pathologically on us, but like that goes to show like how deceitful and like maybe like I don't know, sometimes I'm like, am I assuming negative intent for these people that like are so into like telling us that our reality is not the reality and like that we are the horrible person because of having borderline, or are they mentally ill and we should give them more leeway? I don't know, it's such a hard one.
I think for me, one thing that's occurred to me that has been somewhat helpful is that there seem to be certain people who are not nice to me. Let's just, sort of sugarcoat it a little bit or soft pedal it and say they're not nice to me. The way that the borderline part of my brain works is that it's always working to convince me that it's my fault, that I deserve to get treated this way by this person who put up on a bit of a pedestal. It's very important to me that they express love to me and are kind and caring to me. I think that without like doing the describe skill has helped me, because without that, like the specific things that happened, I find that like my brain, if I'm not around someone for a little bit like that, my brain just why it is like what they did that was mistreating me, and then it's like all I can remember is like how important it is to me for this person to love me. And but I still, it's like it's not that I've completely forgotten that they did hurtful things. There's this sort of memory sense of like they did something to hurt me, and like this person isn't safe, but it's almost like I can't grab hold. It's sort of like a fog or something, where it's like I can't really grab hold onto it, and so then I wind up coming back for more, and it's just sort of like a cycle that keeps going and going. And so I do find that using this skill when things have happened that are hurtful, that are abusive, that are upsetting, especially from people like that, to just break through and not just be like, this person's being a jerk, but to be like, here is what I experienced them doing, and here is how I experienced them treating me, has helped me to just feel a lot more self-confident and a lot less of that just sort of like beating myself up for being a barrier to this person. Not that sort of belief that like, if this person's not showing love for me, it's definitely my fault. And it's not that they're just abusive.
That would be helpful to journal so that you can go back and look and see like, no, you're not misremembering this. This is what they were doing and how they were treating you. I'm like, I think I need to do this tonight. I've got like a list of people in my life where it's like, I think that like describing would be helpful, because not only is it like helpful as like a kind of like evidence of this for my future self, but also like it said in the book for describe, like sometimes it's actually more validating when you are explaining behaviors of other people, like to other people, and they're like, oh my God, that person's a horrible person, or like, wow, you're being gaslit, or like, that's not a good person. And they're doing that based on facts, as opposed to I go into a conversation and saying, this is a horrible person. And they're like, yeah, for sure. Cause like everybody does that. Like, oh, we hate her now? Okay, perfect. Like I've had that conversation with a lot of my friends. But when it's based on fact, it's a lot more validating.
Look, I think it could be overused. I think that I definitely try to avoid just like writing down everything that everyone has done to wrong me, because like, then I'll like obsess about that, and all of a sudden I'm like, with forgiveness and moving on, especially when people have good intentions in their heart. I mean, that's an important part to being healthy mentally. But it's those few people who, I feel like I would be an excellent candidate for Stockholm syndrome. Like if I was ever kidnapped by like terrorists or something, I would like have a hard time remembering that like we weren't buddies and like they had kidnapped me. Like I'd just be like trying to say, why are these people so mad at me? Like I can't remember what they did to me. That would be me. So remember,
I've seen some like incredible TikToks of that, where it's like people pleasers getting like kidnapped, and it's like, so why'd you pick me? And like, did I do anything like in particular, or like, do you want me to be quiet, or like do you want me to talk, because like that, if whatever will make you more comfortable. And like it's just like, oh my God. And I feel you, Dave. I'm just like such a sucker for like people being nice to me, or like even like not nice to me. Like I'm also a sucker for people being horrible to me, and like I just grew up in a context where like that was normal, and so I just like take that as love, even though it's not. It's like, God, this is not good. But I agree, probably not the best idea to just have like a running list of things that people have done to wrong you, because if somebody ever found that, that's like some sort of like weird serial killer movie like plot, and I don't know if I want to have anything to do with.
For me, forgetting the horrible things that like my father did and other people did was like a coping mechanism. So it's hard now sometimes to like, it doesn't happen a lot for me because I cut off a lot of people, but like to remember like, oh, okay, wait, this was bad, and let me describe it and make sure that I'm not minimizing it.
Yeah, because it's so easy to minimize the further out you get of like, well, maybe this wasn't as bad, or like maybe I deserved this or whatever. Like I think there's a fine line between describing things of the past to make sure that you do remember them, and then radical acceptance of like, this happened and I can't change it and now we should move on. And I don't know if you've thought about that balance for you, Shanti. It's a tough one.
I don't know what to say. Yes,
Yeah, I don't think it's like an answer.
That my radically accept my children.
You met all of us because your childhood was terrible. And we're very happy for that. Not happy that it happened. We're very glad to know you. Let's say that.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I'm sure that at some point it's a chapter in here, but I'm not sure that let's move on is actually part of radical acceptance. I think that's one thing that makes it hard for people to grasp radical acceptance and use it, is that it's, in some ways, it really is just exactly what, it's just a different side of describe, where it's like, you know, you're just being super realistic about like what exactly happened. And you're not, and I'm not like deluding myself like, well, maybe this really happened, or maybe what I know happened didn't actually happen. It's more, which I guess is exactly what we're talking about here, is like, what specifically did I observe happening? Without any sugarcoating, without any judgments, without any opinions, without any generalization.
I can't believe I just got schooled on radical acceptance. But
I feel
you're probably right.
I feel very passionate about, particularly because most people, they say that they're really struggling with it, and it's because of this exact issue, is because of the word acceptance and the way it's usually used in our culture. They think that part of it is, and I have to move on from something that was like painful or traumatic. And once you sort of recognize that that's not part of it, it gets a lot easier, I think, to use the skill. And it's been such a powerful skill for me. So that's the only reason. I'm not trying to correct anybody. I just
no. It's
important to me.
Well, and I think that's what I love about this series already. And like, we're only a couple chapters in, is like, each of us has a different perspective on the skills, because radical acceptance for me was so important when I learned it, because I had just done so many horrible things to people in my life. And I needed to be able to say, that happened, that was bad, and now we do something else. Because if I kept going back to that, it would be so detrimental, and you can't change the past. So even if like my description of radical acceptance is like wrong or like not textbook, it almost like, to me, almost doesn't matter, because it was exactly what I needed when I needed it. And that's what I love about talking about these skills for people who have been practicing them for so long, because it's very different than just learning something like radical acceptance. It's that is a little bit of a mindfuck.
Yeah.
I feel like the longer we go through this series, the more like I'm gonna see the connections between skills. Like, even just like these first 4 skills that we've done, I'm just like, wow, describe is so connected to so many skills that I would have never really put that together in the first couple times I did DBT. So this is going to be very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to it. Are there last thoughts on the describe skill before we wrap up for the day? No, we're just going to all write our little notes of how people have wronged us and come back next week with the list. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Me too. It's one of my favorite activities. And it's like so against dialectical behavior therapy, which I credit for like saving my life. But at the same time, I'm like, but I kind of love being judgy. So like, I don't know. I can't like, maybe this is a dialectic. We can have both. But like, sorry, Marcia. That's the one thing I can't do. Anyways, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This is so fun. I'm really excited we're doing this. And we'll see you next week for, what are we doing next? Hold on. Effectively, which I straight up don't remember anything about. So this will be very interesting to go through together, because this is a skill I straight up don't use. So awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Superfeeler podcast. Today's episode was recorded on the unceded and traditional territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps me reach more listeners like you, and we're always looking for improving the podcast. Remember, you can always stay connected with me on social media. You can follow us. The show notes will have all of the details for Instagram profiles. If you want to support the podcast and help me continue to bring great content, please consider joining the Superfeeler community on Patreon. Your support really means the world to me, and there's a variety of different options for support, including some free ones. For all information about the Superfeelers Club, which is the peer support that we run, including upcoming events and resources, head over to Eventbrite or laurieedmondson.com for more information. And if you have a topic that you want me to cover or a guest you'd love to hear from, please send me the suggestions. Always happy to hear them. Until next time, keep on superfeeling and living authentically. This is Laurie signing off of the Superfeeler podcast.